Well, hello there, and welcome to my almost midlife crisis, the show that dives into that tricky time in our lives when we're no longer young, but we aren't old yet either. I'm your host, Jennifer Villamil. I think we can all agree that with each passing generation, we see an increase in social progressiveness. I've always considered myself more progressive than my boomer parents, definitely, and sometimes even my Gen X brother. However, as I spend more time with Gen Z, I start to question, how progressive am I? In today's society, I have plenty of moments when I experience the feeling of getting a little uncomfortable, and I wonder, are we as progressive as we thought? Or is this just part of getting older? Let's dive in. Carl Manheim developed the theory of generations back in the 20s. Yeah, that was a long time ago. According to him, social perspective of youth reaching maturity in a particular time and place is significantly influenced by major historical events of that era. So, a major historical event that has happened and involved the individual in their young age, which then shapes their experiences and gives the event meaning. So, he believed social change can occur without a major historical event, but those events are more likely to occur in times of accelerated social and cultural change. And it's important to note that not everyone in the generation is likely to be impacted the same way. And therefore, it's unlikely that the whole generation moves in the same direction at the same time, which makes sense, right? Like, we're so different than a lot of our counterparts that are even our same age. Like, we don't all think the same, even though we went through the same historical events. So that makes sense. So, what are some of these impacts that we've seen? So, for example, the Great Depression and World War II on our boomer parents, which really impacted their perspective on work and politics. Which, if you think about it, like, my parents used to always say things like waste none, want none, right? Like, a lot of that, I think, comes from probably also their parents living through the Great Depression, who instilled on them that, you can't waste anything. Like, I used to sit um in our house, there was a rule that you weren't allowed to leave the kitchen table, yeah, you weren't allowed to leave the kitchen table until you were completely done with your meal. Like, your plate was clean, your milk was drank, you had to be done. And I would take forever, especially if we were eating meat. Because I don't know, for whatever reason, when I was a kid, like steak or pork chops, like weren't my favorite. So I used to just like chew them super slowly, and I didn't want to swallow, and I would take forever and just try to delay finishing, to the point where like everything on my plate was ice cold and my milk was warm. And I will never forget, like, I would sit at this table. It was like this pink, big table that sat probably like six or eight. And there was like one light hanging above that. My mom would be like cleaning the dishes. Um, and most of the lights in the kitchen would be off except this like one light looking down at me, almost like a police station. What do you call that, like a witness room? I've never been in one, so I guess that's good. Interrogation room. I've watched enough true crime. I feel like I should I should know what this room is called. um but it just was like shining down on me while I was like forcing down this like ice cold food at like 9 o'clock at night. And it was really around, now was that seems aggressive, and I feel like when we have a kid, I don't think that's necessarily going to be the rule. But it really was to try to instill in us that you shouldn't waste anything. And of course, that's something you would take out of the Great Depression, when people were just trying to get what they needed, and that was even difficult, right? So therefore, whatever you had to make sure you made the most of it. So that makes sense. It also is probably why my parents have always been so big on work ethic and like doing whatever it takes. And you should just be really like happy that you have a steady job. And like it was in my family, it was all about like it's not like, don't have too much pride when it comes to work. If you need to pay your bills, you do what you got to do to pay the bills. If that means you need to go wait tables, that means you need to go work at McDonald's. Like, you're not, it doesn't matter where you're at. Like, you are not too proud to do that. I think that goes back to what they had to deal with, right? So that impacted them in a way that changed their perspective on these things. We look at the AIDS epidemic and the Gulf War and their impact on Gen X's view on politics and the LGBTQ community, right? There was a big shift during the AIDS epidemic and how we thought about the LGBTQ community, specifically homosexuals and lesbians, right? And then the impact on Gen X and millennials, elder millennials, on growing up during this like second wave feminist movement, right? And the rise of same-sex marriage, as well as, let's not forget about experiencing 9/11. All of these things had big impacts on our generation. These larger political and societal events have had an impact on generations during their formative years. And this is because they're forming their thoughts, right? It's your formative years because you're forming your thoughts and beliefs about the world that's going to impact how you live the rest of your life and your perspective. I mean, I will never forget when 9/11 happened. Like, I was, I think, a sophomore in college, and I remember waking up kind of early, and I turned on the TV, and I just thought it was like a movie because it just seemed so unrealistic. Like, I just couldn't believe that was actually happening. I just thought it was some movie that was playing. And then I realized that it was real and that this was actually happening. And then the second tower was hit, and I will never forget that, to live through that and see that in real time. And that's, that's definitely impacted my view on terrorism and my view on attacks against the U.S. It's also honestly perspective. There was definitely like an anti-Muslim situation that came out of that. I think not really necessarily from my perspective, but I think generally it was this, not understanding of like the Muslim religion, and then coming on 9/11, they were kind of vilified after that. And I remember when we went to Dubai for vacation, that was actually something that I didn't think I had any of that. And then there was like some uncomfortableness when we got to Dubai, and I saw a lot more of the traditional garb of the locals, and I found myself a little uncomfortable, and I really then leveraged that trip to learn more and to get over whatever that was, because I didn't want that to be part of how I was thinking. But until I was really faced with it and out of my comfort zone, I don't think I realized how much maybe it did impact me. So like all of these things, it's like, even if at the time we don't really cognitively like think about, oh, this just happened and this is what is happening to me now, and this is how I think about things, it starts showing up in different ways, and we are impacted. And with each generation, what they consider like normal is different depending on what reality looked like to them during their formative years. So each generation sees the current progress that has been made, and they push for more. And I think that's good. That's a good thing. That's how progress happens. And as I get older, the theory of generations really starts coming to the forefront in some surprising ways. And it makes me think, is this how my parents felt at my age, right? At almost 40, did my parents start getting a little uncomfortable by what they saw younger generations doing, or started feeling like this disconnect? It's not always like a feeling of uncomfortableness. It's also just this feeling of like, oh, that's different. And it's like, there's just a clear difference in how we think about things. And it makes me start wondering, like, I always thought I was so progressive, but am I as progressive as I thought that I was? And I've seen these differences come to life really in two places most recently. I mean, I feel like it kind of happens all the time, but the two places most recently is in the classroom and in the workplace. So this spring, I was lucky enough to be given the opportunity to be an adjunct professor at a well-known university here in Chicago. And I was so excited. Like, I have always been interested in teaching, but I've never really pursued it as my career because, I mean, I hate to say it, but there is a bit of a lack of respect we show teachers in this country, not just financially, but as a profession. And I'm not going to dive into the politics around the education system because, one, this podcast is not about politics. And two, I could probably make an entire podcast season around my thoughts on the education system in the United States. And I don't even have kids yet in the education system. So that's, you know what, that's for someone that has more to do with it than me to discuss. So we're not going to talk about that. But I will say that considering how important teachers are to our children and their impact on our society through really helping to raise each generation, the fact that the average salary of a teacher in the US is only $67,000 in 2022 is a disgrace. And that's the equivalent of someone in my industry with less than 5 years experience and with pretty much little to no managerial experience. And don't even get me started on the lack of respect we give them in general. The way we talk to teachers, the crap they have to deal with, and like the lack of support given to them is just sad. So if you're a teacher, God bless you. Thank you so much for like the thankless job. And like, if you ever teach my kid, just know I'm in full support and I'm not going to give you crap. So I will be on your team. So thank you to all the teachers out there. But anyways, I remember growing up like playing classroom where I would line up all my stuffed animals and I would be the teacher. And I would even go as far as to create homework assignments and tests for them. And I would grade them. Like, I would do them and then I would grade them. And growing up, I loved going to school. Like, I would get so excited to start every single school year. I would color coordinate my folders to my spiral notebooks by class. So like biology would be like blue, and then like English would be red, etc. And I would spend a week planning my first day of school outfit and pretty much suffer from insomnia for days leading up to the first day because I was just so excited that I couldn't sleep. And I've always thought about teaching in the back of my head, and I thought it would be something that I would truly enjoy. So when I was asked to be an adjunct professor for the spring class, I was stoked. I was so excited. And I had aspirations of like connecting with my students the way I remember some of my favorite teachers had through the years. And I still remember some of their names and the lessons that they taught me. Like, I could just picture it. Like, I would be everyone's favorite teacher, and they would come to class early and they would leave class late, like just to chat with me. And my class would have like a waiting list because of the word of mouth would be so positive that students would be trying to get in. Like wow, was I in for a rude awakening? Don't get me wrong. I had a class of great kids. I was really lucky, but my vision of what it would be like and then the reality of it were wildly different. Like, it didn't help that the first 2 weeks was virtual because of COVID. So trying to engage a class of students in person is hard enough, let alone remotely. So when the school announced that we were going back to the classroom in early Feb, I was ecstatic. Like, this was my chance. I was going to start building those connections that I had envisioned. And first of all, there wasn't a single class all semester that I had a full classroom with 25 students. Not a single week, not a single one. Every single week, I was getting emails about some different reason they couldn't make it at all, or they would request to participate via Zoom instead. The most common was being sick. And honestly, like in times of COVID, it's really the easiest way to get out of pretty much anything. Like, you say you're sick and people are like, oh, okay. All right. You're like, I'm not feeling well. They're like, no, please don't come. When I was their age, like, you better be in the hospital or on your deathbed to not show up to class or work. But nowadays, if you're having like any symptom, you stay home. And that's not just physical. If you're not feeling well, like mentally too, you get to stay home. Like a student that I had reached out saying they need to take a mental health day. Can you imagine saying that to your professor in college? Like, excuse me, sir, like I just really need to take a mental health day today. Like I think they may have just laughed in my face. Like I'm not sure, but I do know that this would not have been considered an acceptable reason to miss class. And missing class and taking mental health days are areas that I see a big difference between my generation and these younger folks. Now, like every generation has kids that doesn't show up to class. Like that's not new, right? Like we all knew people that didn't show up to class. But the difference is the rationale behind it and the expectation that this won't have a negative impact, even though class participation is 20% of their grade. Like they're still shocked when the class participation was lower when they like barely ever came to class. Like I had one guy that like literally came to class twice, the last 2 classes, the entire semester. Like, do you think his class participation grade was like the same as people that showed up every week? Like, no, of course, like that wouldn't be fair. And I can get behind taking a sick day because honestly, I'm happy that we're finally out of the expectation that you need to be dying to like take a day off. Like that was ridiculous and it was frustrating because there was always that one person that would show up, they'd be sneezing, they'd be coughing all over the place, and we would congratulate them for like pushing themselves or like grinning and bearing it. Like all the while, whatever sickness they had would then spread to the rest of us faster than a rumor between like 12-year-old girls. But it was difficult to tell who actually needed a sick day and who just didn't want to travel to campus and would rather tune in via Zoom in their PJs. Like, trust me, I get it, especially on those snowy nights when I would much rather be cozy under a blanket with my dog rather than tramping through a blizzard to get to class. Like, I hear you. But not coming to class for a mental health day or because you had a conflict like Ash Wednesday service or another meeting, those I had a hard time accepting. The thing with the mental health day in today's society is you can't say no to that. Like you can't. And I'm a big proponent of mental health. However, I'm still not clear what needs to happen for a mental health day to be required. Like to me, that's a vacation. That's what vacation days or spring break or whatnot is for. Like you can take personal days, but my assumption is that they don't have class like we have work, like 8+ hours a day, 5 days a week. So like you could not work your schedule to clear a day where you don't have class, but you also don't have homework and can do what you need that day to like get your head in a good place? Or is that just my elder millennial talking? Is that thinking outdated? Like, honestly, I'm not sure. At first, the students not showing up really frustrated me. Like I had a full-time job and a personal life. I had my own struggles that I had to shift meetings around to make teaching work. My teaching not only impacted my own schedule, but it also impacted those of my team and my company because they had to work around my obligations. But here I was showing up every week and coming in early to ensure I was ready to go at 4:15. And this includes the weeks where I could barely stand up because I was early in my pregnancy and I felt like shit. Like I would be struggling to make it through class without throwing up and they would just zoom in. Like it felt like a lack of respect for me and for my time. Like part of me believes this is because this is how I was raised. Like when you show up late or not at all, it was considered disrespectful of someone else's time. So I'm that person. Like I am that person that is always earlier on time who shows up when I say I will. Like my friend laughed because the other night she told me like, yeah, why don't you come over like around 6 and then we'll like order in dinner, and 6 o'clock, like on the dot, like I'm there. Like that's just me. But after a while though, I started to look at it differently. Like, why was I getting upset about it? Like, I'm not the one looking to receive a grade to graduate. Like, them not showing up to class has no bearing on my ability to teach those that came. And it's not my job to convince them to not take the 50 grand a year in tuition their parents are paying for granted. It's their education. It's not mine. The difference is I forgot what I felt like at that age. Like, I forgot what that was like. I'm looking at it from a lens on where I am now, not where they are. They're in this selfish stage because they can be, because they don't have people or families that they have to support. And as complicated as their lives are, they don't understand that it will only get more complicated and they'll get torn in many more directions and have to figure out how to make it work. Like, that's the benefit of life that I've received, but they're still on that journey. And experience is really the only way to get there. Now, work has been the other place I seem to experience the theory of generations probably the most. And I think that's partially because I work in advertising and work is where I spend most time with younger millennials and Gen Z cohorts. And advertising is a young industry. And for the most part, elder millennials and Gen X and boomers are in leadership and executive positions trying to lead a workforce that we don't always understand, if we're being honest with ourselves. Like, maybe I'm going out on a limb here, but if I'm truly, truly being honest, I would say that while I'm getting better at relating and understanding my younger cohorts, there are some gaps that still haven't been filled. I wonder if there are any folks my age or older that truly feel like they are completely aligned and relatable to the younger generations. And if you do, listen, congratulations and good for you. And also, if you could let me know your secret, like DM me, email me, whatever, that would be great. Because for me, the older I get, the more gaps I seem to find. Like, for example, perspective on work. So I already mentioned how the Great Depression helped shape the boomer mentality around work, right? So as someone that grew up with boomer parents, it was instilled in me from a very young age that if you work hard, you'll be rewarded. So for example, if I completed this entire yellow notepad page worth of chores, which yes, I would get like a full yellow notepad worth of chores, I would be rewarded with my $5 allowance. And I was taught that your boss knows best because they have more experience. And your job was to make your boss's job easier. That's what I was taught. I was taught you should be thankful you have a good paying, steady job and don't make waves to put that in jeopardy. Loyalty to a company was rewarded, and there was a sense of pride to be at the same place for 10, 15, or 20 years. Now, if you're my age or older and you have ever managed a team of younger millennials and Gen Z, you can already start seeing where this is going because they do expect to be rewarded for hard work, but they have a lot to say on what they believe is fair and are willing to ask for it. And they don't necessarily believe the boss always knows best. And their boss's job is to do what they can to make sure the work conditions are positive for the employees. They don't believe in loyalty to companies and often believe it's better to jump around to move up in your career, which I don't know. I'm obsessed with TikTok. It's probably my favorite social platform. And there are so many videos that I see of like Gen Zers giving career advice to other Gen Zers, talking about all the reasons why they should quit. And like some of the reasons are like, I'm like, what job are you going to have if like these are all the reasons you're going to quit? Like, and it's a lot like if your boss isn't serving you or like, you have a bad boss, if they don't like pretty much bend over backwards to like whatever you're asking for, like, I'm like, I honestly just don't know where you're going to work. Like you could keep jumping around and trying to find that, but like, I don't know. And also, why would you take career advice from someone that's like 2 years in? Like, they're still learning themselves. So I don't know if that would really be like my go-to career guru. But anyway, that's just me. They definitely have zero qualms about asking for what they believe they deserve and holding managers accountable with challenging feedback. And there are so many memes or videos around the differences between boomer, Gen X, millennials, and Gen Z at work and how they respond to work situations. And honestly, they're hilarious because for the most part, they're true. It's funny because it's true. And however, these differences can be really challenging when really everyone is just trying to work in harmony to like achieve the business goal. right? And I remember very specific moments in which these challenges became apparent to me. And while there are honestly many, I'll focus on two that I experienced in my most recent role that really stuck out in my mind. So the first one, I believe millennials were kind of like the first generation to push back a little bit in hopes of achieving more work-life balance. Like work-life balance, I feel like I could be wrong, but I feel like it kind of was coined by millennials because we saw our parents constantly working and always were wishing that we could spend more time with them. So as we entered the workplace, we yearned to get a place in our career that we would have more control over our own calendars and create that balance because our professional and our personal lives, like we wanted to make sure that we could do both. And the joke was on us though, because we didn't realize that it's almost impossible to truly achieve control of your own calendar at work. Like maybe if you're Elon Musk or you're Jeff Bezos, but even for the CEO at companies we work for, your calendar is not 100% in your control. Like we all get pulled into late nights or weekend meetings when we'd rather pretty much be doing anything else instead. But in today's workforce, especially coming out of the last 2 years of COVID and the great resignation, the push for more balance is real and it is more tangible than ever. And this push isn't coming from those in charge. It's coming from the workforce themselves. They're pushing back for companies to pay more attention to the working conditions, both physically and mentally. And they're willing to walk away from companies that don't show concern for their well-being. Now, in my last role, I was laid off. And I talked about that in episode 1. Yeah, that one, that role. This was one of the areas that I was excited about when learning about the company. Like I loved that they had this culture of putting the team first and making a real effort so that they felt supported on all fronts. And coming from a feeling of burnout, I was really supportive of this. And I believe that it was not only the right thing to do, but it was usually under prioritized in our industry. But as much as I was excited and inspired by their willingness to cater to the needs of employees, I found myself a little doubtful some of these efforts would actually be successful. Like for example, every day, 1 hour of everyone's calendar was blocked to give you time to take a break. Maybe meditate, do some yoga, go for a walk, like you name it, but it was to take a break. And my first question during orientation was, do people actually do this? Like, do people follow it and actually not book on your calendar during that time? And to my surprise, people pretty much did for the most part. But then a couple weeks in, they implemented another idea, 1 meeting Fridays. The idea is that we're all in so many meetings all of the time that you have no time to actually concentrate and get work done, which is true. That's 100%. That's real. And that is a frustration. So every other Friday, you would have to clear your calendar so that you can get work done without interruption. And I love this idea. I love it. But I also was concerned when I heard about it. Like we already had 5 hours a week when we were supposed to avoid booking meetings. And now we are adding another full day. So every other week, we would shorten the time we could meet by 45%. Like for a company that prides itself in collaboration of team members, how is that going to work? Here's the thing though. I love that they were at least trying it out. Right? I mean, most companies would say, like, no way, we're not even going to do it. They would get scared by the change and they would never even implement it. So I gave them all the props in the world for at least trying to make it happen. And for the most part, it seemed to be doing its job. However, while I was clearing time on people's calendar, was all this focus on giving people time back successful? And what I mean by successful is, did it actually help employees be happier with their work-life balance? Did they feel the benefits? Did it help them retain talent? Did it give us an edge versus other agencies? Like what business impact did it have? And considering the recent layoffs, the data honestly doesn't really exist to prove if it was successful or not. But anecdotally, I had 2 people quit during this time. The reasons for quitting had nothing to do with work-life balance and everything to do with money or a different opportunity that they wanted to try. So I also gave 2 compensation increases during this time. Both met with "that's it." Like literally, I was like, hey, here's your compensation increase. And they're like, that's it. And it was really a reminder that the marketplace was super competitive. And I 100% believe in work-life balance. However, to what extent does it make sense for the business? And what is the right way to think about it in terms of ensuring our employees have the room to think, but also that the business and our clients are supported? And does any of it have any impact on retention? These are questions I do not have an answer to, but I would love to discuss. And honestly, I think that this is the difference between how, as an elder millennial or maybe a Gen X or a boomer, thinks about the same question versus how someone earlier in the career does. Because we're coming at it from a, not only is this good for the individual, but what about for the larger company and for the business? Because if the business isn't working, the individual is not going to be happy either, because that's going to have a negative impact. So they both have to work. So then what's that balance? The second one is really around embracing being uncomfortable, right? So the theory of generations makes sense to me. Each generation goes through certain political and societal changes that shape them, right? So that generation then has children and then raises them according to their beliefs. But that generation has had their own events that are going to impact their thoughts and beliefs. And all of us go through life sorting through what we were raised believing and what the world since has taught us. And for some of us, we choose to continue to see the world through the lens of comfortability, right? Filtering what we experience through what our parents taught us. And for the rest of us, and I would consider myself in this group, we use the experience we've had to challenge what we were taught and come up with our own perspective. And I truly believe that one of the benefits of getting older is allowing ourselves to evolve, to be open to changing our perspective as we have new experiences and as we interact with the up and coming generations. If it's true that every generation is more progressive than the next, then it's assumed that we'll all feel uncomfortable at times as we're pushed to think beyond where we've been. But we shouldn't run away from that feeling. We need to embrace it. We don't have to agree with everything, but living in that place of uncertainty is really going to enable us to better relate to not just our own generation, but to our children and eventually their grandchildren. So thank you so much for joining me today. Please rate and review this podcast on Apple Podcasts. Join me on my social channels to get more content and inspiration. And you can follow my Almost Midlife Crisis on TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. Subscribe to my YouTube channel, and there's plenty of videos of the full episodes, but also shorts that will keep you entertained all week. And subscribe wherever you go get your podcasts to make sure that you are always up to date on the latest episodes. And sign up for written transcripts if you don't want to hear my voice and you just want to read. And they could be delivered right to your inbox at myalmostmidlifecrisis.com. So thank you so much. And until next time.